The Egyptian and Nubian empires. Nomadic invaders ruled Egypt. After the prosperity of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt descended into war and violence. This was caused by a succession of weak pharaohs and power struggles among rival nobles. The weakened country fell to invaders who swept across the Isthmus of Suez in chariots, a weapon of war unknown to the Egyptians. These Asiatic invaders, called Hyksos, ruled Egypt from about 1640 to 1570 before Christ. The Hyksos invasion shook the Egyptians' confidence in the desert barriers that had protected their kingdom. Israelites migrate to Egypt. Some historians believe that another Asiatic group, the Israelites, settled in Egypt during the rule of the Hyksos. According to the Hebrew Bible, Abraham and his family first crossed the Euphrates River and came to Canaan around 1800 before Christ. Then, around 1650 before Christ, the descendants of Abraham moved again, this time to Egypt. Some historians believe that the Hyksos encouraged the Israelites to settle there because the two groups were racially similar. The Egyptians resented the presence of the Hyksos in their land, but were powerless to remove them. Expulsion and slavery. Around 1600 before Christ, a series of warlike rulers began to restore Egypt's power. Among those who helped drive out the Hyksos was Queen Ahotep. She took over when her husband was killed in battle. The next pharaoh, Kamose, won a great victory over the Hyksos. His successors drove the Hyksos completely out of Egypt and pursued them across the Sinai Peninsula into Canaan. According to some biblical scholars, the Israelites remained in Egypt and were enslaved and forced into hard labor. They would not leave Egypt until sometime between 1500 and 1200 before Christ, the time of the Exodus. The New Kingdom of Egypt. After overthrowing the Hyksos, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, about 1700 and 1075 before Christ, sought to strengthen Egypt by building an empire. As you may recall, an empire brings together several peoples or states under the control of one ruler. Egypt entered its third period of glory during the New Kingdom era. During this time, it was wealthier and more powerful than ever before. Equipped with bronze weapons and two-wheeled chariots, the Egyptians became conquerors. The pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, about 1570 to 1365 before Christ, set up an army including archers, charioteers, and infantry of foot soldiers. Hatshepsut's prosperous rule. Among the rulers of the New Kingdom, Hatshepsut, who declared herself pharaoh around 1472 before Christ, was unique. She took over because her stepson, the male heir to the throne, was a young child at the time. Unlike other New Kingdom rulers, Hatshepsut spent her reign encouraging trade rather than just waging war. The trading expedition Hatshepsut ordered to the land of Punt, near present-day Somalia, was particularly successful. Hatshepsut sent a fleet of 5 ships down the Red Sea to Punt in search of myrrh, frankincense, and fragrant ointments used for religious ceremonies and in cosmetics. In addition to these goods, Hatshepsut's fleet brought back gold, ivory, and unusual plants and animals. Thutmose, the empire builder. Hatshepsut's stepson, Thutmose III, proved to be a much more warlike ruler. In his eagerness to ascend to the throne, Thutmose III may have even murdered Hatshepsut. Between the time he took power and his death around 1425 before Christ, Thutmose III led a number of victorious invasions eastward into Canaan and Syria. His armies also pushed further south into Nubia, a region of Africa that straddled the upper Nile River. Egypt had traded with Nubia and influenced the region since the time of the Middle Kingdom. Egypt was now a mighty empire. It controlled lands around the Nile and far beyond. In addition, it drew boundless wealth from them. Contact with other cultures brought Egypt new ideas as well as material goods. Egypt had never before, nor has it since, commanded such power and wealth as during the reigns of the New Kingdom pharaohs. The Egyptians and the Hittites. The Egyptians' conquest of parts of Syria and Canaan around 1400 before Christ brought them into conflict with the Hittites. The Hittites had moved into Asia Minor around 1900 before Christ and later expanded southward into Canaan. After several smaller battles, the Egyptians and Hittites clashed at Kadesh around 1285 before Christ. The pharaoh Ramses II and the Hittite king later made a treaty that promised peace and brotherhood between us forever. Their alliance lasted for the rest of the century. An age of builders. Like the rulers of the Old Kingdom who built the towering pyramids, rulers of the New Kingdom erected grand buildings. In search of security in the afterlife and protection from grave robbers, they hid their splendid tombs beneath desert cliffs. The site they chose was the remote valley of the kings near Thebes. Beside royal tombs, the pharaohs of this period also built great palaces and magnificent temples. Indeed, the real title pharaohs means great house and comes from this time period. Ramses II, whose reign extended from approximately 1290 to 1224 before Christ, stood out among the great builders of the New Kingdom. At Karnak, he added to a monumental temple to Amun-Re, Egypt's chief god. Ramses also ordered a temple to be carved into the red sandstone cliff of the Nile River at Abu Simbel. He had these temples decorated with enormous statues to himself. The ears of these statues alone measured more than 3 feet. The empire declines. The empire that Thutmose III had built and Ramses II had ruled slowly came apart after 1200 before Christ, as other strong civilizations rose to challenge Egypt's power. Shortly after Ramses died, the entire eastern Mediterranean suffered a wave of invasions. Invasions by land and sea. Both the Egyptian Empire and the Hittite Kingdom were attacked by invaders called the Sea Peoples in Egyptian texts. These invaders may have included the Philistines, who are often mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Whoever they were, the Sea Peoples caused great destruction. The Egyptians faced other attacks. In the east, the tribes of Canaan often rebelled against their Egyptian overlords. In the west, the vast deserts no longer served as a barrier against Libyan raids on Egyptian villages. Egypt's empire fades. After these invasions, Egypt never recovered its previous power. The Egyptian empire broke apart into regional units, and numerous small kingdoms arose. Each was eager to protect its independence. Almost powerless, Egypt soon fell to its neighbors' invasions. Eventually, Libyans crossed the desert to the Nile Delta. There they establish independent dynasties. From around 950 to 730 before Christ, Libyan pharaohs ruled Egypt and erected cities. But instead of imposing their own culture, the Libyans adopted Egypt's. When the Nubians came north to seize power, they too adopted Egyptian culture. The Kushites conquered the Nile region. For centuries, Egypt dominated Nubia, and the Nubia kingdom of Kush, which lasted for about 1,000 years between 2000 and 1000 before Christ. During this time, Egyptian armies raided and even occupied Kush for a brief period. But as Egypt fell into decline during the Hyksos period, Kush began to emerge as a regional power. Nubia now established its own Kushite dynasty on the throne of Egypt. The people of Nubia. Nubia lay south of Egypt between the first cataract of the Nile, an area of churning rapids, and the division of the river into the Blue Nile and the White Nile. Despite several cataracts around which boats had to be carried, the Nile provided the best north-south trade route. Several Nubian kingdoms, including Kush, served as a trade corridor. They linked Egypt and the Mediterranean world to the interior of Africa and to the Red Sea. Goods and ideas flowed back and forth along the river for centuries. The first Nubian kingdom, Kerma, arose shortly after 2000 before Christ. The interactions of Egypt and Nubia. With Egypt's revival during the New Kingdom, pharaohs forced Egyptians to rule on Kush. Egyptian governors, priests, soldiers, and artists strongly influenced the Nubians. Indeed, Kush's capital, Napata, became the center for the spread of Egyptian culture to Kush's other African trading partners. Kushite princes went to Egypt. They learned the Egyptian language and worshipped Egyptian gods. They adopted the customs and clothing styles of the Egyptian upper class. When they returned home, the Kushite nobles brought back royal rituals and hieroglyphic writing. With Egypt's decline, beginning about 1200 before Christ, Kush regained its independence. The Kushites viewed themselves as more suitable guardians of Egyptian values than the Libyans. They sought to guard these values by conquering Egypt and ousting its Libyan rulers. Pianki captures the Egyptian throne. In 751 before Christ, a Kushite king named Pianki overthrew the Libyan dynasty that had ruled for more than 200 years. He united the entire Nile Valley from the delta in the north to Napata in the south. Pianki and his descendants became Egypt's 25th dynasty. After his victory, Pianki erected a monument in his homeland of Kush. He had words inscribed on it that celebrated his victory and provided a catalog of Egyptian riches, such as silver, gold, and copper. However, Pianki's dynasty proved short-lived. In 671 before Christ, the Assyrians, a warlike people from the southwest Asia, conquered Egypt. The Kushites fought bravely, but they were forced to retreat south along the Nile. There, the Kushites would experience a golden age despite their loss of Egypt, the golden age of Meroe. After their defeat by the Assyrians, the Kushite royal family eventually moved to Meroe. Meroe lay closer to the Red Sea than Napata did, and so became active in the flourishing trade among Africa, Arabia, and India. See map, Kush Empire, 700 before Christ. The wealth of Kush. Kush used the natural resources around Meroe and thrived for several hundred years. Unlike Egyptian cities along the Nile, Meroe enjoyed significant rainfall, and unlike Egypt, Meroe boasted abundant supplies of iron ore. As a result, Meroe became a major center for manufacture of iron weapons and tools. In Meroe, ambitious merchants loaded iron bars, tools, and spearheads onto their donkeys. Then they transported the goods of the Red Sea, where they exchanged these goods for jewelry, fine cotton clothes, silver lamps, and glass bottles. As the mineral wealth of the central Nile Valley flowed out of Meroe, luxury goods from India and Arabia flowed in. The decline of Meroe. After 4 centuries of prosperity, from about 200 before Christ to Anno Domini 150, Meroe began to decline. Aksum, another kingdom located 400 miles to the southeast, contributed to Meroe's fall. With a seaport on the Red Sea, Aksum came to dominate North African trade. Aksum defeated Meroe around Anno Domini 350. Centuries earlier, around the time the Kushite pharaoh sat on the Egyptian throne, a new empire, Assyria, had risen in the north. Like Kush, Assyria came to dominate Egypt.